I knew we would never be friends, but working for him would be a lot easier if I at least respected him. I looked at his socks again and realized that would never be an option. I was a tolerant guy, but even I had my limits. The left sock was clearly green. It was completely wrong. Just a few minutes before, I had seen Ralph's right sock. It was blue, and worse, ringed. The universe worked because there were rules. Gravity pulls downward. I've had bad luck with women. Socks had to match, and under no circumstances could an adult's socks be ringed. Those were the laws of nature. Once again, I wondered if I was the only rationally thinking person on this planet. Statistically, this was highly unlikely, but empirical evidence stubbornly supported this theory. Of course, seeing Ralph and the other comedians I've worked for, one could argue about the grown man thing. He was wearing something like a mechanic's overalls. On his back hung what might have been a fire extinguisher. He held a simple hose coming out of it and acted like it was a scary weapon. On his head was a cheap helmet with symbols painted on it. Safety goggles completed this extremely silly outfit. He looked like a combination of a construction worker and ancient Egyptian. He was paying for it all, whatever it was, and the least he could expect for his money was for me not to make fun of him. Humor wasn't my strong suit, so that was easy. Besides, the money was good. The group consisted of 5 people, and even compared to the usual craziness of the world around me, they stood out as complete lunatics. It seemed like 5 of the craziest people around had banded together and hired the only sane one, which happened to be me. 3 guys and 2 girls, and they were very serious about the absurd shit they were doing. I never could tell if they really believed in what they were doing, or if they were just overly ambitious cosplayers. Still, they were nice enough if you like people, which I didn't, and the money was good. As usual, they came to pick me up in their van, which was based on Ghostbusters but with a huge Exterminators logo, probably for copyright reasons. With solemn faces, they opened the sliding door and invited me inside like an important person. As always, I was struck by how absurd the whole thing was. I had no real role in this. Hell, I didn't even know what this thing was that I had no role in. As usual, they started the trip cackling and chattering like 15-year-old girls about to meet their favorite boy band. The ride was always the hardest part of the trip. I tried to shut them out, ignore them, think about entropy or quantum physics. Fortunately, before we reached our randomly chosen destination, they always became silent and thoughtful, which suited me much better. After they left the van and got on with whatever absurd things they thought needed to be done, I felt much better. I didn't dislike people, I just preferred them to be somewhere else. I could work on my current programming project while they were doing stuff. Ralph led the group inside. His mismatched socks and the painted fire extinguisher on his back didn't seem to qualify him for a leadership role, but the group seemed to disagree. When they returned, they were tired and mangled. Sometimes they had small cuts and bruises, and sometimes even open wounds. Whenever this happened, I began to doubt people in general again. Why was everyone acting so irrationally? Why did I seem to be the only mentally healthy person in the neighborhood? Now that they were gone, I could focus on the really important aspects of life, coding and science. Coding brought me most of my money, science, especially physics, was my passion. The idea that the entire universe could be completely described by a few formulas always fascinated me, even though some of those formulas had yet to be found. The human race was part of a well-functioning machine living under the illusion of being individuals with free will. The rest of my income came from the weirdos who had just gotten out of the van. I remembered the first time I'd met them. A friend had invited me to a special private party, which sounded very promising for a nerdy loner like me. I hadn't had any sex since my divorce. At the few parties I'd been invited to, talking about my programming abilities didn't impress the girls, but I didn't know what else to talk about. That day I was told to just go into the house, which I found unlocked and dark when I arrived a little later. Yes, I thought, I could finally get laid. It looked more than promising. However, when I walked into the living room, it was not at all what I had hoped for. The 8 people in the room were fully dressed, looking sober, and sitting around a round table. All hands were resting on the table, and everyone looked like they had just awakened from sleep. If this was a party, it was the most boring one I had ever seen. "He's gone!" cried the girl in despair. "Gone! What happened?" "He was here." I could feel him clearly. "The spell is broken," the guy added in a serious tone. He was dressed in a ridiculous black cloak and seemed to be some sort of master of ceremonies. I noticed a board on the table with numbers and letters and a wooden pointer on the letter R. I had no idea what they were doing, but it didn't look very promising for my main goal for the evening, getting laid. Suddenly, the people at the table seemed to notice my presence. Everyone turned to look at me. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I still had a huge oops feeling. "Who is this guy?" the hooded junkie asked. "It's just Tim," said the friend who had invited me, as if that cleared things up. "He has to go. Right now. His mere presence sucks all the energy out of the ritual. I can feel him closing the gate." "What?" I asked eloquently, having no idea what they were even talking about. I hadn't closed anything, not even the front door. "You," one of the girls accused me, pointing her finger accusingly at me. "What?" I repeated, unsure if I really needed clarification on all the weirdness. "Just leave. Your mere presence blocks the energy flow," the hooded MC clarified, as if that should have explained something. But it didn't. Okay, I agreed, thinking it wasn't actually a bad idea. I already felt like the N+1 wheel on an N-wheeled vehicle, and this wasn't the party I'd hoped for. Whatever crap they were doing at the table, I didn't need to be a part of it. I turned around and was about to leave when a pretty girl stopped me. "Wait, he might be useful." "Seriously, Kara? What could that asshole possibly be good for?" "He is invulnerable. His mere presence stops the flow of cosmic energy." Yeah, these people are clearly off the rails, I thought, and continued on my way out of this hotbed of insanity. "Cosmic fucking energy," I muttered. Wait. "We can pay you." I stopped where I was. Sounds interesting, because I still had over a year of child support ahead of me, and I had less money than a black hole singularity. "Why?" I asked. "Just accompany us. Sometimes we have special assignments. You can wait outside, and when the situation gets out of hand, we'll call you." "Okay, and then?" I tried to sound like I had an idea of what this was about. I didn't, but the girl was cute. "You just walk into any place we're at. I think you'll be perfect. Just walk in like you just did." "How much?" That's how it started. It was always pretty much the same. They were going to some haunted house or other spooky fairy tale place. It wasn't a problem. People believed all sorts of nonsense. In reality, they were just abandoned places. Dirty, boring, but not scary in the slightest. I'd have no problem sleeping in any of them if it wasn't so inconvenient. Unfortunately, I couldn't focus on coding right away. Thinking about the group of fools and the money they gave me led me to think about my ex-wife. I'm not usually prone to overthinking things, but what had happened was on my mind, and it wasn't about the money at all. My thoughts about it were irrational, but there seemed to be nothing I could do about it. For a while I was sure that Irina really liked me. She was warm and caring, interested in what I was doing and asked a lot of questions about me. When I got the flu, she nursed me back to health with an almost frightening dedication. At the time, she was the only person whose presence I truly enjoyed. I remembered the day everything went downhill, though I hadn't noticed it at the time. "Tim, you know I really love you, don't you?" Damn, I hated questions like that. How would I know how she felt? To lighten the mood, I just nodded. "I want to. I really do. Even though you never talk about it, I just know you feel the same way about me." This was even worse. I didn't really believe in the concept of love, but since I at least liked her, I knew I could never mention it. I didn't need to, because she kept going anyway. "I was really trying to figure out what you were interested in. Tim, I'm really trying. I'm doing my best to grow our relationship, to turn it into something deep and meaningful." Seriously, I thought to myself. I don't even know what she's talking about. All I'm asking is that you open up a little bit, okay? I feel like I hardly know the real you, and you're not really interested in me. Shit, I thought. It was in situations like this that I always failed. People seem to expect irrational emotions, which I could fake, but only up to a point, since I didn't understand what people did when they felt emotions. Just do your best for me, okay? She was kissing and hugging, and that's when I thought I had dodged a bullet. After a while I felt worse, but I didn't know why. Irina started complaining that I was woefully rational, and it sounded like something bad. As someone interested in science, I was a good observer, so I had long noticed her growing discontent. But I could never find a reason for it. We had a good life, we didn't need anything. Her arguments about never reaching my core just didn't make sense. Why did she need to? What was she trying to accomplish with this? What was my essence anyway? I was completely confused. She seemed obsessed with what she called getting to know me for real, but I didn't even realize what that meant. I never hid anything from her or lied to her. She asked a lot of personal questions, all of which I answered, but she never seemed satisfied. After a while she just stopped asking, and I sensed that she was disappointed that I was more than okay with it. She complained that I could never open up, and I didn't understand what that meant. After she gave up trying to explore my inner self, she began attending what she called spirituality groups, which translates to total nonsense. She always looked at me expectantly as she told me about the new levels of weirdness her groups were achieving. I never knew what kind of response she was expecting, but apparently I wasn't giving it. She seemed to try to live as unscientifically and irrationally as possible, and it was clear she was doing it for my benefit. I just didn't understand why. Finally, one day I came home at the usual time and discovered a carefully prepared scene. A strange car in the driveway, strategically prepared clothing tracks leading to the bedroom. She might as well have put up a neon sign. I noticed she'd forgotten about candles and quiet background music. Later, I wanted to watch a documentary and noticed that the TV remote seemed to be missing. In our bed, I found her lying on her back with her skinny yoga teacher lying between her legs. I wouldn't call this scene the epitome of passion. Both of them looked at me expectantly. Since they were just lying there as if they had forgotten how to move, it was like a static simulation of sex. Obviously it was all purely for my benefit, but I didn't understand why they did it or what they expected of me. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you," I said. I felt completely calm and unaffected. "And that's all you have to say?" Irina cried, and there was a definite tone of frustration in her voice that made me uncomfortable. If anyone had a right to be angry, it should have been me, but that would be stupid. The scene and its aftermath needed no explanation. "What do you want to hear?" I asked, and I meant what I said. Don't you want to know why? Don't you want to fight for me? Still no emotion? Still an iceberg? Does nothing touch you? Are you even human? Hell, are you even alive? I noticed that the yogi was naked except for his socks. Although they were the same type, some were old, worn and gray, while others were still dark black. That wouldn't happen to me. My sock drawer was properly sorted. "Tim?" she asked, clearly expecting some sort of response. I assumed her questions were rhetorical, but that didn't seem to be the case. I noticed that the older sock had a hole in it, right by the ball where sock holes are usually located. Okay, what to say? I genuinely didn't understand what she wanted to hear. "It sounds like you want a divorce. Why didn't you just tell me that?" "Aw," she screamed. "I hate you. I really tried to love you. I'm doing this for you, asshole. This is your last call." Her eyes were fixed on me, she had clearly forgotten about the yoga guy. Her normally beautiful face was red, blotchy, and wet with tears. It didn't make any sense, and even the yoga guy looked embarrassed. All in all, the situation was awkward. Not knowing what else to do, I looked at my new smartwatch and noticed that it was 12:34, one of my favorite times. I thought about taking a screenshot, but realized I already had too many. I did what I always do in situations I didn't know how to handle. I abstracted and calculated everything. In this case, it was not easy because there was a lot of emotional and irrational behavior. The probability that she would want me to find them like this was over 90%. That and her reaction told me that the likelihood of her wanting to make a drastic change in her life was close to 100%. Did she want to live with him? He was skinny and not very attractive. I was the exact opposite of him. No, the probability of her wanting him was less than 15%. Obviously, he was just a tool for her. That probably made the likelihood of him wanting her irrelevant. Either way, it was none of my business. Was this the first time? I estimated the probability of it just being a tool for this particular case to be above 80%, so almost certainly yes. The probability of it happening again was pretty low, but it didn't matter. While I was pondering, I noticed that they started to move slightly, probably because their static appearance seemed a bit pointless. Or maybe they were just bored watching me ponder. None of them were clearly getting any enjoyment out of it. I went back to my calculations. In the end, there were only two decisive numbers: the probability that I would want to stay married and the probability that she would want to stay married. Combined, they were approaching zero. There was only one logical solution left. All further words and efforts were in vain. There was simply no point in going through the grueling effort of reconciliation for the sake of such a low chance of success. It led to only one possible outcome: divorce. It was very frustrating, because she met most of the requirements I had for a wife. Of course, I did not love her. The notion was ridiculous. Only fools lost themselves in the illusion of that feeling. Love was just a chemical reaction in the brain, and not a very useful one at that. It led to irrational behavior, like a mild poisoning. The surprisingly unattractive yoga weirdo quickened his pace, and I didn't think what he was doing could be pleasurable to a woman. Irina looked at me with an expression I couldn't read as she rocked back and forth. Yes, she clearly wanted a divorce too. I wondered why she hadn't just told me about it. It seemed so much easier than all this fiddling. I remembered the science show I wanted to watch. Do you know where the TV remote is? This immediately stopped their movement. It didn't seem like a good time to ask that question. All I got were astonished faces, so I turned to look for the remote. I never understood why people were making such a fuss about this marriage thing, and it was driving Irina crazy. I tried to portray the necessary emotion, but I'm not a very good actor, and I wasn't sure she really bought it. I'm a good looker, so she tolerated it for a while, but in hindsight, this escalation was inevitable. She wasn't happy with her life, but that wasn't my problem. At least I can stop acting out, I thought. While the emotional breakup wasn't a disaster for me, it was surprisingly expensive. I watched the building. This time it was an abandoned warehouse, and everything seemed quiet. They rarely asked me for help, and if they did, I didn't have to do much. In my opinion, they were completely crazy, but they were paying for the show, so who was I to complain? I went back to coding the damn encryption procedure, which was already costing me more time than I had bargained for. Just as I was about to get to work, I was interrupted by my damn phone. It was a text from Kara, just a simple 911. Sighing, I closed my laptop and headed towards the building. It was my job to follow them wherever they were whenever I got that message. It didn't happen every time, but it seemed to be a big deal to them, for some reason I never could figure out. I entered the old warehouse, looked around, and tried to find them. There was some noise coming from the end of the hallway, and I followed it. That usually worked. As usual, I stumbled upon one of their cosplay action scenes. Everyone was in some sort of frozen, ridiculous fighting poses. The spectacle would have been impressive, but there was one thing missing. There were no enemies. In my opinion, this is essential to a good fight. Instead, there was a lot of junk lying around. Things had been broken at some point, and I wondered if it had happened recently. They were sweating, and it looked like someone had scattered a strange brown mass on the ground. All in all, the scene was absurd and disgusting. "They're gone," Max exclaimed, still panting. "Yeah. Hell, that was close. It was only one, though." I could already feel the coldness of the void. That's my absolute terror, Kara added. She looked at me, seemed genuinely happy to see me, and I had no idea why. Still, if a pretty girl looks like she's happy to see me, that's probably a good thing. Void? There was no emptiness. I felt like I was suffocating. You know how much I hate that feeling, Max replied. Once again, I felt like they were taking this shit way too seriously. I had long since given up trying to find a reason for their actions. There weren't even cameras around. They always did some sort of simulated fight and stopped when I showed up. Good job, Tim. You saved our asses. You closed the portal. Yes, of course, I replied, deciding to play along. That's why I'm here, right? Oh yes, Melanie added. That's why you're here. Misunderstood, but necessary. Ignorant is just fine. I chuckled, trying unsuccessfully not to take it as an insult. I was sure I was far more educated than all of them put together. Yes, my special ability. Are we done? Yes, it is. Thanks again. We'll just get our gear together. I nodded, looking at the useless parts of the suit scattered around the large room. Kara was still looking at me ever so strangely tense. Shrugging, I went back to the van to finish programming the damn routine. I usually only heard from my costumed employers every few weeks or even months, so I was surprised when Ralph called me just a few days later. We need you. The flow of cosmic energy is getting denser and denser. They were paying me well. For nothing, so I tried hard not to laugh at that ridiculous statement. The echo of their nonsense seemed quite appropriate to me. Yeah, sure. Definitely tighter. When do you need me? You don't believe in any of this, do you? Of course you don't believe in any of it. That's why you're the one we need. I didn't respond. Ignoring cryptic statements that weren't really meant for me has served me well throughout my life. Sometimes people made them to make me curious about their strange views of the world, but I'd never been interested enough to do it. How about in 5 minutes? Wait, what? That's pretty quick. I have some important things to do. I was in the middle of an intense game mission and was just about to order a pizza. With pepperoni and cheese. That was my version of a perfect evening, one of the facts that always drove my ex-wife crazy. My idea of a perfect evening, of course, did not include waiting in a van in front of some supposedly haunted house and no pizza at all. We're going to pay double. The difference in shifts. Yes. Done. While I was waiting for the cosplay clowns, my ex-wife Irina popped into my brain again, uninvited as always. She wanted to have one last talk with me before signing the divorce agreement, and this seemed like a small price to pay for finally getting rid of her. You don't care, do you? Her initial gambit was actually correct, but I knew it would be bad form to admit it. Well, I'd certainly prefer. Thankfully, she interrupted me as I didn't want to lie and didn't know what to say. You never cared about that. That's what really drove me crazy. Tim, you need help. There's something seriously wrong with you. I often had the same thoughts. Everyone around me seemed at least a little crazy, so the likelihood that I had the same problem was high. I admit my ruse didn't work, but I was really hoping you'd finally understand, she continued. What? I thought, but chose to remain silent. She didn't seem to expect me to do anything. You're a nice guy in your own way, you're just unbearable to live with. Even if the problem was me, why should I change to become as irrational as the others? It seemed absurd. I think maybe something happened to you, maybe as a child. Don't waste your life. Seek professional help. Why did she care? I didn't mind the divorce, she should be happy. It was what she wanted. But she cared, and that was obvious even to me. I see you're not going to open up anymore. Always a closed shell. I feel sorry for you. I tried to reach out to you, what I did to VJ was a cry for help. But I've never been able to crack your shell. It's hopeless. I loved you and I did everything I could think of to help you, but I'm at my limit. I'm done. Please just know that I really did love you. I just can't save you. I wish I could, but I don't know how. I see. Sorry. Apologizing was ridiculous since she'd cheated, but I didn't care. It was the last time I saw her anyway. When she turned around and left my life forever, I wondered once again if I should have any more feelings. Or really feel anything at all, for that matter. It was an important moment, and it seems that most people experience emotions in that moment. I decided again that the likelihood that my overwhelming emotions would improve my life was pretty slim, even if I managed to somehow come to my senses. After all, Irina clearly had deep feelings, and look what they did to her. As I entered the van, I tried not to stare like an idiot. They'd taken their ridiculous equipment to a new limit. Max had some kind of huge sword that looked suspiciously like an RPG knockoff. I couldn't recall such a thing in Ghostbusters. Kara had her usual thing hanging on her back, looking like a vacuum cleaner, but with a few new tubes leading to a larger nozzle. She looked at me like she wanted my approval, but I tried to pretend I hadn't noticed the ridiculous contraption. They were all wearing face shield helmets and thick gloves, which was a novelty. I thought I had no idea how to properly defend myself in case of dense energy flows. Is it going to be a tough day at work? I asked, trying to sound neutral, but no one bothered to answer. They were fiddling with their fancy equipment, pretending to be preparing for something. A few minutes later, we pulled up to an old dilapidated mansion. For some reason I never noticed these dilapidated buildings in our town when I was alone, but my cosplay comrades seemed to know them all. Their paranormal shit seemed to be centered on the few abandoned buildings our town had to offer. I had the treacherous thought that a broom and a paintbrush would do the old house more good than a fake sword and a painted fire extinguisher. I watched them go inside and once again asked myself what their strange fascination was and what my role was. I was sure they didn't believe it was all real, so they must think they were some sort of acting group. Oh well, people were reenacting the American Civil War, so why not Ghostbusters? And yet, why would they want me to follow them and stop their acting? They didn't even use me as an audience member or to film their performances. My contemplation was interrupted by the phone ringing, much to my surprise. They always waited much longer before summoning me so they could have a chance to play with their stuff. The message was incomplete, just a 9, but I knew what it meant. I walked into the house, which I had to admit was creepy if you believed such nonsense. I walked down the dark hallway, following the noises as usual. The hapless heroes had a unique ability to come up with all sorts of wild noises, even in nearly empty, abandoned houses. This time, however, things seemed much more tense. I had no idea why they kept smashing everything and always stopped when I appeared. As usual, things had already calmed down when I entered the room they were in. However, the situation was a little different. Max was unconscious, or at least acting like he was unconscious. Chris's hair was badly scorched and Melanie was bleeding from her eyebrow. They all looked like they had been to war and lost it. Once again, shaking my head, I questioned their sanity. They had taken a methodical game to the extreme, and no one was even watching them. But there was something else. Something I hadn't noticed before. There seemed to be someone else present in the room. They didn't greet me as they usually did, but they were still taking up defensive positions in one rather dark corner. It was there that I sensed it. It was hard to explain. I couldn't see anything, smell anything, or hear anything. But I knew there was something there. There was definitely some kind of presence. While my mind was still busy searching for the rational explanation with the highest probability, my body had already reacted in its own way. I felt shivers and goosebumps, which was a new and interesting experience for me. The more I thought about it, the stronger the presence seemed. My doubts seemed to intensify it, which in turn pushed the still conscious members of the group even further back in fear. Then another thought occurred to me. In fact, this whole situation was extremely interesting from a scientific point of view. I had a unique opportunity to discover something new, or at least to expose a good fake. Driven by curiosity, I headed to that dark corner. I even unlocked my phone and launched the camera app. For some reason, once my scientific interest took over, the feeling that I had encountered something threatening lessened. I estimated that there was over a 20% chance of encountering something unknown in this seedy corner, but whatever it was, it seemed to be receding. I hurried to the corner in the vague hope of finding something, at least a glimpse, but of course it was just an ordinary empty corner. Damn it! They'd almost succeeded in pulling me into their paranormal group fantasies. God, that was embarrassing. I'd always looked down on these easily manipulated cosplay esotericists, but today I'd almost stooped to their level. Are we done? I asked, trying not to be as embarrassed as I felt. I shouldn't have bothered, though. They were too busy coming to their senses, nursing their wounds, and giving thanks. No one noticed that I was about to believe their shit. I quickly checked that Kara was okay and left the house. My work was done. I was a little pensive, however. For a while I was sure that there was something unusual here, until my rational brain took over again. The likelihood that it was all just an illusion was so high that, according to Occam, it was. Next step, buy tarot cards or take diluted sugar pills? Ridiculous, I needed to pull myself together. Yet some doubts kept creeping into my mind. For a few seconds, I could have sworn there was something out of this world in that corner. The implications were unthinkable, however, and I pushed those thoughts away. It was time to do something real and nerdy, so I opened WoW and resumed my search for a mage. I was trying to heat up a frozen pizza on the cooktop, as my oven was having another one of its bad mood days. So far, the pizza was completely unimpressed with my efforts, and to make matters worse, I heard my phone ringing. This inevitably meant social interaction, which I avoided as much as possible. Instead of answering the call, I shifted the pizza around, trying to salvage anything even vaguely resembling edible. The results were not encouraging on either side. The bottom seemed to be completely black, but the cheese on top was still frozen. The damn phone kept ringing. I vaguely considered doing something with a blowtorch when I noticed that even the cheese in the center was suddenly completely burned, while the rim was still partially frozen. There seemed to be an area in between that was suitable for digestion. I quickly turned off the heat. The phone was still ringing. I really needed the money for a deck and oven. If I was going to kill myself with fast food, I should be able to do it in style. I made the mistake of casting a brief glance at the phone display. Kara. Damn it, again? Not even a day later and they needed help again? Their insanity kept reaching new levels, and I guessed that this source of money would soon dry up when they all ended up in the loony bin. Thinking about the oven, the alimony, the ex-wife, and the rest of the universe, I sighed and answered the phone. Tim. She shouted in my ear, in case I'd forgotten my name. What's wrong? I replied carelessly, trying to calm her down. Tim. She repeated, and her voice didn't get any calmer. Yes, I know my name. Calm down, please, and tell me what this is about. You have to come. We're leaving at 5. It's bad this time. Really bad. That's always a bad thing. Look, I just spent ages preparing my gourmet meal, and it would be a shame. 500, she interrupted me. Come on. Pizza didn't look edible enough even for a hungry pig. 500 looked a lot more tempting than this thing. Okay. We can make a deal. Just show up, okay? 500 if you're here in 5 minutes. Do it. Now, and she just hung up. They weren't nervous. I hated nervous people, they were noisy and unreasonable. They didn't chatter as they usually did. That always annoyed me to the extreme, as they never seemed to know what they were talking about. No, this time they were in a state of outright panic. Their faces were drained, sweaty and pale. I, on the other hand, was a cool, scientific, rational thinker. When their mood started to spoil my mood a bit, I repeated it like a mantra. This time it was an abandoned factory. Again, I was surprised at how many abandoned buildings we have around here and that they all seem to be haunted. Maybe they were left empty as a public service, for some kind of paranormal playground? Where else would a self-respecting ghost haunt people? They clearly didn't like clean, inhabited places. This was the version with the panicked customer who sought help from this comedy troupe. Why they did it, I never understood. As usual, the caller was waiting in front of the building, waving his arms animatedly. Once again, I marveled at everyone's acting. It all seemed so real. Shrugging, I unpacked my laptop to do some programming. Oddly enough, Kara immediately interrupted me. This time you have to be with us from the beginning. Kara, you're crazy, he's our Joker, Melanie interjected, anxiety in her voice, which had been her usual state of mind lately. It's too much for us, Mel. We will burn him. We need his ignorance to remain intact. Wait, what? I contributed. I wasn't overly sensitive, but I had a vague feeling it was rude. Of course, they ignored me. Kara's right, Mel, Ralph seconded. We all know it's growing. The gates are opening. If his ignorance can prevent it, why not use it from the beginning? Because he'll see it, you idiots. We shouldn't even talk about it in his presence, Mel replied. It's time to put this argument to rest. Calm down, okay? I know you all believe this shit. You can talk openly while I'm here. You want me to go right along with you? No problem. To be honest, I was a little curious. I felt something last time. They said the gate was opening, and I felt like the gate in me had opened a little bit too. I didn't mind finding out what they kept talking about. Whatever it was, I was sure it was nothing paranormal, but it could still be interesting. Eventually they agreed to have me accompany them from the start, but their discussion was suspiciously like procrastination. They clearly felt it was their duty to go there, but they were in no hurry to do so. Once my case was settled, there was nothing left for them to do but sigh and put on their gear. This time I took a closer look. Max's sword still looked ridiculously huge. He was a strong guy, but there was no way he could handle the thing with any speed in a real sword fight. Basically, it would be a big slow club with a point. Of course, he would have no real opponents, and this thing had a lot to brag about. Upon closer inspection, the sword didn't look like a Chinese knockoff. It looked quite dangerous and even well used. I didn't like that. I don't know if he thought about it, but he could easily hurt someone with that thing. I hadn't had a chance to get a closer look at the others' gear before we moved towards the factory. I'd mostly ignored their stuff before, but if everything was as unsafe as Max's sword, I might have to be more careful around them. I tried to ignore the fact that they were hiding behind me, the only unarmed person, as we walked toward the entrance. Something was seriously creeping them out, and $500 suddenly made me feel underpaid. We approached the rickety wooden gate, and I was thankful it hung half open, as I didn't really feel like touching that dingy old thing. The squad, or troop, was still hiding behind me, which didn't seem entirely reasonable since I was the only one without weapons. I suddenly remembered the Star Trek crew members wearing red shirts, looked at my shirt and was relieved to see that it was blue. Once their apparent panic began to affect my mood, I pulled myself together. There are no paranormal phenomena, I reasoned. Everything could be explained by the laws of physics. If we encountered something unusual, it would simply be an opportunity to explore something new and interesting. I immediately felt like myself again. As we made our way inside, I thought about horror movies and how they all follow the same script. Dark hallways, creepy lighting effects from the side or above, unidentifiable objects hanging from the ceiling, trash strategically placed on the floor. I looked around and immediately relaxed. What I saw was exactly a standard horror movie set, which meant two things. First, the whole thing was a carefully prepared scene. There was no way such a perfect scene could have come about by accident. Second, the guy sitting in the back was always the first to die, since he never watched his back. Usually the cute black guy and the pretty cheerleader didn't survive either, and I felt sorry for Chris and Melanie. Chuckling a little, I walked down the hallway, feeling perfectly safe and not even bothering to look into the rooms on either side. Just like in the movies, the main scene took place in the big room, which was always right in front of us. Relaxed, I walked down the hallway until I entered the large room at the end, just as I expected. I vaguely heard the others still following me, but wouldn't have minded exploring the whole con by myself. The room was properly prepared, meaning it was dark, full of strange objects and ridiculous moaning noises. Really, guys, I thought. Even in cheap horror movies, this went out of style in the late 70s. Are there hidden cameras in here? I asked, looking over my shoulder. Very funny, guys. They looked at me as if I had grown a second head. In fact, they looked like the second head was right behind me and above me. I felt a draft and turned around, muttering, "Come on, really?" There was clearly some movement in the dark patches in the back of the hall. Something dark was moving in the darkness. Of course, everyone but me was holding torches, but their panic made the beams dance like crazy, contributing greatly to the general chaos. Sighing, I realized that my valiant comrades and employers were going to be completely useless. I grabbed my phone, turned on my flashlight, and went to check out that neighborhood. Rationally, I was still expecting some sort of prank, but I had to admit that my insides were trying to convince me that something was wrong. If I had to describe it, I would say that reality was distorted, as ridiculous as that sounds. It was like something was shimmering, but it wasn't the air, it was the space in front of me. It was too fascinating not to explore. I quickly calculated that the chances of discovering something really interesting exceeded 10%. I tried to take a picture, but it turned out to be just an ordinary dirty corner of an abandoned warehouse. Nevertheless, the very essence of space/time seemed distorted just a few meters in front of me, and I couldn't ignore or explain it. Incredibly, a gust of air reached me. It was completely different in sensation than any air I had ever felt before. It also smelled different. Not unpleasant, just foreign. I knew immediately that it wasn't from this world. The gust was followed by something more solid. I couldn't make out the shape, but I felt something pushing out some of the air and space in front of me. I heard the others gasping behind me, and they were too frightened for my taste. But I couldn't see anything in particular. I felt something wanting to get closer but couldn't, and I wanted to see it but couldn't. With annoyance, I felt that it was my scientific curiosity that was keeping it at bay. I didn't even ask myself why I knew these things. There would be time for that later. Was this old factory some sort of gateway to another dimension? There was less than a 1% chance of that happening. In the movies, such portals were always cool rings with ancient ruins or mirrored surfaces. They certainly weren't dingy dark corners in old factories. There was even an old Walmart flyer lying on the floor. No decent alien would open their portal in a place like this. Still, something was there and wanted to come, but we were at some sort of impasse. I wanted to see it, but that seemed to be what was holding it back. Why? Wasn't it used to scientific, rational thinking, unexcited people? Maybe it even needed something like those wisps of panic behind me? I could have tried pretending to be a little scared, but I felt it would be unconvincing. Whatever it was, it craved real fear. Fascinating. Suddenly one of the idiots behind me let out a piercing scream for no apparent reason, shocking me to death. That was enough. The stalemate had been broken. The creature skipped away. I clearly felt it, mostly because it shoved me roughly aside, but I couldn't see it clearly. When I got to my feet again, the noise had already started. Each of these fools was busy fighting a trifle. Their fear seemed real, they looked like they were fighting for their lives. The only thing missing was an enemy. Chris was clubbing the empty space between them, delivering glancing blows to Max, but the latter didn't seem to mind as he was busy stabbing another empty space with his sword, narrowly missing Kara. It would have looked ridiculous if it wasn't so damn dangerous. Stop it, okay? I tried to speak assertively, but I was completely ignored. They were in the heat of the fight of their lives and always ignored me even in the calmest of times. I watched their ridiculous ballet for a few seconds, mostly because I had no idea what else to do. Finally, I saw him. The whole room was pretty dark, but something darker flickered between them. It seemed solid, but I couldn't make out its distinct shape. It was like it was constantly changing. It moved gracefully around the group, like it was dancing, like it was playing with them. I checked the movie on my phone and was able to see it there too, once I knew what I was looking for. But it wasn't very impressive, just a formless dark shadow. I thought about the long tradition of blurry and underexposed photos of UFOs, Bigfoot, and aliens and decided that my shots fit the tradition quite well. Though the thing looked as alien as anything I'd seen in even the weirdest science fiction movies, it wasn't particularly large, didn't seem dangerous in and of itself, and wasn't even armed. I wondered why the others were making such a fuss over it. As a true nerd, I had always dreamed of contact with an alien. There he was, right in front of me, and I was standing there like an idiot, doing nothing but staring. Suddenly filled with joyous anticipation, I headed toward the creature. Dodging Chris and Max's blows, I was almost to it when it noticed my presence. The creature was formless and almost indistinguishable against the gloomy background, but I knew it was watching me, and it wasn't happy about it. It stopped its dance, and the group stopped struggling as well. It felt like everyone was watching me, and that was a feeling I'd always hated. But curiosity won out, and I held out my hand, idiotically saying, "Hi." I even smiled. I didn't expect him to shake my hand, mostly because he didn't seem to have one. A hand, that is. When I touched the fuzzy rubber surface, I realized that the thing was evil, but didn't look particularly dangerous. At that moment, Max stabbed it through the back. I immediately realized he was dead. I had just helped kill the only alien I had ever seen and would see again. I knew it was evil, but I still felt horrible. It was something I, as a true nerd, had always dreamed of, and I was so close to interacting with him. I had so many questions about life and the universe in general. The group immediately fell back into line and began chattering nonstop, defiling this important moment, which was to be expected. The next disappointment was added when the alien seemed to dissolve right in front of me before I could get a closer look. See that damn dragon? A dragon? It was a giant insect. What kind of drug did you take? I don't know what you saw, but what I was fighting was a huge reptiloid from outer space. Impressive. It was clearly a woman's voice, and it came from right behind me, from the corner where the dark blob had entered our world. It was soft, but it was unexpected, and it managed to do the miracle of silencing the whole group. We all turned around and saw a vaguely humanoid woman in peasant clothes. Her proportions were a little off. Her limbs were too long, her head too big. In her simple cotton clothes, she looked like a lanky village priestess. That was pretty damn impressive, man, she remarked surprisingly profanely. I admired her English until I realized she hadn't moved her mouth. And dude? Really? What kind of alien said dude? Not knowing how to react, I looked back at the cohort of cosplayers, but they were too busy just looking at her. You'd think they'd never seen an alien before. As always, they were worthless. Thanks, I guess, I replied. She nodded, and I was relieved that she understood me, despite my odd way of using my mouth to speak. That was the penultimate one. This nightmare is almost over. Nightmare? I spoke slowly and clearly, hoping to get some useful information for once. It's a surviving bioweapon from a long-forgotten war. They have been plaguing my world for generations. They turn into something different for everyone, usually a person's worst nightmare. They cause people to kill each other, even within families, or kill themselves. It is one of the most dangerous weapons ever created. We hunted it, so it spent more and more time in your world. Honestly, he didn't seem too dangerous. I'd love to examine him more. You want to see it? Okay. I want to take you on a trip to my world. We have another one there. You may explore it as you wish. Is this a joke? You're inviting me to travel to your world? Where do I sign up? Right here, she said mentally and led me to the dark corner where I first saw the distortion. Tim, Kara called out from behind me, and I turned to her. Be careful, okay? Don't hurt yourself and please come back, okay? I just nodded, deciding to think about her unexpected behavior later. When I turned around, she smiled slightly and waved at me. As usual, the woman's behavior was hard to decipher. Perhaps she was genuinely worried. When I was young, a girl I liked at the time talked me into trying surfing. I realized later that it was just a big prank. Everyone knew I was a typical nerd and athletic as a rock. She and her friends sat on the beach and eagerly awaited my best swipe. Quite miraculously, I climbed up on the board and glided down the first wave like I had never done anything else in my life. The sensation was exhilarating. Unfortunately, I never got to repeat it, and the initially disappointed crowd got their money's worth and more. But I'll never forget those few seconds of bliss. That's what I felt as we glided smoothly through the nothingness. There wasn't blackness around us, just emptiness. After an indeterminate amount of time, a huge tree suddenly appeared above us, surrounded by what looked like a garden world from some cliched eco-movie. There were people like my companion all around, long-legged eco-hipster priestesses, and they all seemed to be bored out of their minds. Our appearance out of nowhere obviously didn't impress any of them. The world itself looked pretty damn beautiful, though. Civilization seemed well advanced, mostly because I didn't see any tech gizmos. Everything looked like a well-maintained park. This was how I'd always imagined life in truly advanced civilizations to be. "Follow me," she said, and surprised me by actually using her mouth to do so. Nevertheless, I understood what she wanted to say. "Okay," I replied and realized I hadn't moved my mouth this time. Weird. The people here seemed remarkably disinterested in everything. If I, an incoming alien, didn't pique their interest, I wonder what would. Some followed us in silence for a while, probably because they had nothing else to do, until they realized where we were going. Then they suddenly wanted to do something else that looked suspiciously like nothing. When we reached the entrance to the cave, we were alone again. "All right, monster killer. The last one is inside. Shouldn't the entrance be littered with the bones and weapons of failed heroes? That's not how this thing works. It only works on your mind. Are you saying that only mental wreckage came back from that cave?" She just shrugged, obviously not wanting to confuse me with an unnecessary truth. "Look," I said blankly, "this isn't even my world. Countless people have already failed and paid a heavy price for it. And I'm just some ignorant nerd. Why exactly should I be the one to do this for you? Because you can and you want to. You need this. You've always wanted it." It sounded like something Irina would say. Really? I hesitated and tried to decide if she was right. The probability seemed higher than 50%. "Are you sure I have a chance?" "No, but I am optimistic. I've observed the people in your world a lot from the outside. The gates were always open, but we didn't have to interact. Hey, why not? We've waited so long for contact." "I know. Imagine you found a tribe in Borneo. Would the first thing you do be to provide them with jeans, a TV, and credit? Your world has to find its own way forward." I muttered. "So why should I care about your problems if you don't care about ours?" "Because you are curious. Curiosity is the only emotion you do not suppress. If you blocked your emotions the way you have, you would become at least partially immune to them. What's out there might not be able to get to you. Assuming that's true, how do I kill him? I have no idea. We've been living with this plague for thousands of years. This thing appeared back in the days when we still had wars. It's like a Ronin, a weapon that has lost its master. 2 left, and you've already killed the other one. But this one, the last one, is more powerful." I didn't want to complicate things by mentioning that it was actually Max who stabbed the other creature. Sighing, I went forward into the cave. She was right, I was curious. In fact, I was looking forward to it. I realized I wasn't even afraid. My life already sucked, so why be afraid of losing it? It was too interesting not to. The cave wasn't as dark as I'd expected. The walls seemed to emit some kind of glow. After a while, I came to an open area where there was plenty of sunlight and even a few trees. There was a stone bench, and it looked very shabby. I had a strange feeling that I was entering a fight where countless people had already fought, and all of them had failed. The bench faced a dark recess, and I assumed that was where my opponent was. I didn't know how to begin. Was there some kind of ritual? Was there something I was supposed to say? My thoughts were interrupted by a slap. The force was enough to keep me barely on my feet. But I mustn't fall, I thought. More importantly, I mustn't cry. Crying would make him even angrier. He hated crying. Do you finally get it? My father yelled at me. He slapped me again for good measure. I knew he was watching my reaction carefully. He was looking for tears. He was looking for that slight twitching of my eyes that preceded my fall. He was looking for weakness. I knew he needed it. He wanted to reach for his belt and punish me. Mary should have had an abortion like I told her to. Now she's dead. All because of you, you worthless little shit. I couldn't remember my mom. According to him, she was a saint, but if that was true, how could she have married that cruel, sadistic alcoholic? Once again, my head spun from the slap. I ask you a damn question. I don't know, Dad. This time he hit me with a closed fist. It was the first time, and I flew backward to the ground, unable to hold on. From below, he looked like a giant. An angry, drunken giant. What did you say, you worthless little shit? I didn't react emotionally, as I had accustomed myself to do. No emotion. It was important. I was getting better at it. I wasn't just hiding emotions, the trick was to not experience them at all. I said I don't know why she's dead, I replied stubbornly. Smirking, he pulled out his belt. Don't you dare talk about her like that. She was a saint, do you hear me? Then he started hitting me as I sat on my ass. The blows were very painful, but for the first time I didn't cover up. Let them come, asshole, I thought. I don't even know if you're mine. Maybe you're just a bastard. You think she's cheating on you? Didn't you tell me she's practically a saint? He stopped, stunned. Never before had I dared to speak back. I wouldn't blame her. Who would stay with a violent alcoholic like you? I wouldn't even be surprised if it was you who killed her. The look on his face was priceless. Suddenly I remembered something I'd been ruthlessly pushing out of my mind. The stairs. Her frightened scream. You pushed her, didn't you? Everything came back like a flood. It was a terrible night. Mom tried to protect me. I saw her clearly for the first time, and immediately I was overcome with a feeling of deep sorrow. It was a powerful emotion, the first I remembered since I was a little boy. However, I needed to focus. You killed her. She wanted to leave you and take me with her. For the first time in my life, I felt calm and confident. He could hit me, but he couldn't hurt me anymore. I had exposed his weakness. I felt like I had exorcised a powerful demon from my head. I felt free. He tried to answer, but immediately disappeared. Without transition, I found myself back in the cave. I knew I had become a different person. I mourned for my mother. I embraced the loving feeling I had for her. I also noticed that I had some pretty positive feelings for Kara and was really looking forward to seeing her again. However, there was something I needed to do first, so I decided to get it over with. I stood up and noticed a few simple weapons lying around, probably left behind by previous participants. I picked up a nice short spear and headed for a dark corner. Memories of a dog that almost bit me as a child came to mind, and it made me laugh. That's it? I scoffed at the creature. I realized that it had no particular power over me, since my father was my only real fear, and I had just defeated this demon. I noticed that the creature itself radiated fear. A large spider appeared in my mind, but it was ridiculous. I never had a problem with spiders, and this thing was firing at nothing. I entered a darker and smaller cave. Finally, I found him hiding in the corner. A glance at the massive bones on the floor convinced me that I was doing the right thing. No, the creature screamed right in my mind as I thrust my spear into it. It hung on the spearhead like a dark leathery pillow, unimpressive at all. Generations of these people have failed? Really? It didn't seem that hard. As soon as I shook it off my spear and turned around, I was hit with a flash of adrenaline. I wasn't used to that and had to crouch down again. Damn, I'm going to have to learn to live with emotions starting from scratch. This was very close, and it could easily end badly. For the first time I realized that I wanted to live, and the thought surprised me. How could I have been stupid enough to fight this creature for no good reason? On the other hand, if I hadn't fought it, would I still be the same old rational, unfeeling person? I'll have time to find out when I return to my own world. That sounds really good, my own world. Stumbling, I made my way back to the cave exit. The woman who brought me there had disappeared. It seems she wasn't optimistic enough about my chances to even wait for the outcome of the fight. It made me a little angry, which surprised me. I had yet to learn how to deal with even the simplest of emotions, and I had to not let them overwhelm me. To distract myself, I tried to find my way back to where we had come into this world. Anger wasn't an emotion I liked, fear was just as unpleasant. The thought of being stuck in this world terrified me. There was nothing I could do to get rid of these emotions except find my way home. While I wasn't expecting a real victory parade with alien confetti and strange music from unicorn horns, just ignoring them was just wrong. I wasn't even sure if they knew about the outcome of the battle. Certainly no one cared enough to ask. These people, if that's what they were, took indifference to a new level. They had even left my former rational unemotional self in the dust. I could feel the anger intensifying and it wasn't very pleasant. The negative emotions were just unpleasant and seemed to be clouding my brain. There was nothing I could do about it, I thought, fumbling and stepping on that unusual round stone I had seen when we arrived. To make matters worse, I saw the woman who had brought me here in several aliens. She only glanced at me briefly before tossing an S-shaped object through the vertically arranged ring. That was the end of her attention to my presence. The game they were playing looked extremely boring, and indeed they all looked extremely boring. Still, it was more interesting than me. I didn't think there was a clearer way to say, I don't care about you, regardless of what you've done for us. I was seething with anger as I forced myself back into my world. Whatever or whoever was responsible for the transfer had been accomplished, and in my rage I hadn't even thought about it. At least the experience of surfing was more enjoyable than the first time, as I knew what awaited me. The fact that I arrived on my ass and the floor was dirty as hell didn't help my mood. I had no idea how to keep my emotions under control, and right now I wasn't going to do it even if I did. I was starting to enjoy the pure mindless negativity. I almost hoped some giant half-wolf half-human would lunge at me, snarling and spitting. The adrenaline was so high I was sure I could tear it apart with my bare hands. I stepped out of the dark corner and saw Kara sleeping next to the door, all alone in this creepy old place. Her hair was covered in decades of dust and sand. My anger evaporated, replaced by worry and affection. Damn it, I thought, do normal people really experience this roller coaster? It was definitely distracting. How could anyone think clearly under such a constant barrage of emotions? Kara woke up and looked at me. She started laughing, and I had no idea why. It's a spear, she said, still giggling. You look like a stone old man returning from a hunt. I looked down at the short spear I still held in my hands in confusion. I hadn't noticed it since I'd used it to kill that weird alien on the leather cushion. I guess I just forgot to put it down. Oh, well. I like it, I think. But you should look at your own outfit before you laugh. Embarrassed, she lowered her gaze to her usual cosplay outfit. The spear suits you. Did you kill that thing? Yeah, I guess so. Good, she nodded, as if she talked about this kind of thing every day. I bet you're some kind of hero out there. Ah, as far as I know, no. Let's just say they were a little underwhelmed by their celebrations. Doesn't anyone care? That's right. Aliens, she hummed with feigned disdain. They just can't be trusted. Right? What about the rest of your group? Similar effect. Main problem solved, everyone disappears. So it's disbanded? Yes. There's no need for that now. We never liked each other anyway. My newfound intuition told me that we were dancing around the main theme. How long have you been waiting for me? Well, a few hours, give or take. Here? Of course. Where else would you show up? But it's freaking creepy in here. She only nodded. But you kept waiting, I stated the obvious. She only nodded again, suddenly incredibly fragile and shy and beautiful. For me? Yes. For how long? Months. I didn't know how to tell you. I don't think I'm the same as I was then. I mean, a super rational calculating guy. You know. I hope she understood what I meant better than I did myself. She giggled again. It wasn't at all like the giggles of people who watched me try to surf. I decided I was enjoying it. But only from her. You know, I don't think you're ignorant anymore. I never thought you were, but now it's out in the open. I like that. Now that my emotions were revealed, or activated, or whatever, I realized that many of them were directed at her. I felt incredibly attracted to her, but I couldn't find the right label, nor did I care. Instead, I just grabbed her and kissed her. I felt her shocked, but she didn't resist. Me neither. Why don't we go home? I asked. Yes, she replied and looked incredibly happy. I thought about Irina again briefly, beginning to realize what she was trying to accomplish. As it turned out, cheating on me with an unattractive yoga teacher wasn't the best solution. A cosplay troupe, a couple of ancient bioweapons, and an alien civilization worked much better. I hoped she was happy wherever she was, and was glad it wasn't around me. As we left the building, I summarized the results. I had fought and defeated 2 old, evil bioweapons, made contact with several strange aliens, visited another world, posthumously defeated my overbearing father, rediscovered my emotions to a frightening degree, and found the love of my life. All in all, it wasn't a bad day, I decided. As always, many thanks to Randy and George. I'm known for moaning about the lack of a storyline for events, but the theme for this event was particularly challenging. Fortunately, Randy came up with the basic story idea and did the final editing. George was again kind enough to polish the story as only he can.